Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I'm here to discuss the Ukraine war. It's been a while since I've done a little bit of an update on what's happening in Ukraine. That's because there's not much that took place basically on the ground. One of the things that I'd like to begin with, and this is a request to all of you, please do hit the like button. That really helps my channel grow and reach a larger audience. That is something which is important for me to actually share my views and of course do my work in terms of discussing the geopolitics around India and of course the world with all of you with me. Right, let's begin with regards to what's happening in Ukraine. But before we do, I'd like to basically just take a moment to discuss one little thing. With Ukraine, we have noticed a particular trend that keeps actually happening. If you remember from the first part of the war, when it took place, one of the things that we saw is pretty much every week we have a certain big incident that happens, and that is basically being discussed by the media all over the place. Let's start from the initial parts of the war. Initially, we had the ghost of Kiev. We had, of course, after the ghost of Kiev, we had the Bucha when towards the Battle of Kiev, and then after that, Bucha incident that took place. Post that, there was the entire tension that took place with regards to the Chernobyl reactor during the first phases of the war. Then we had the entire focus towards the east, wherein the Azov battalion and everything else came into being in that particular sector. And I'm sure we've heard about the Battle of Mariupol, where a lot of the focus actually took from the world. A lot of the focus actually transferred from the world. Then it was these magic weapons from the M777 howitzers, now which is the latest flavor of the season, the HIMARS, which are basically multiple launch rocket launching systems, which are supposed to be what the sort of game changing weapons for the Ukrainians. Now, today, what I'm going to talk to you about is this big offensive that Ukrainians are talking about in Kherson. This has been much reported by the media around the world. As a matter of fact, a lot of the pro-Western media has been writing articles and has been doing shows, has been talking about it relentlessly as an Ukrainian opportunity to hit back at Russians and take back a critical city, which is a city called Kherson in the southern part of Ukraine. Before I begin, I'd like you, as I said, to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and yes, if you want to donate to my effort, please do hit the thanks button, or you can join the channel as a member and be a part of the Dev Talks journey. A little bit about Kherson. It's a city in the southern part of Ukraine. A little interesting thing is that if you notice the map of Ukraine, there is a river that cuts the Ukraine country into sort of a half, which is called the Dnieper River. This particular city is on the western side of the Dnieper River. Till now, the entire battle of Ukraine has been taking place in the eastern part, which is the area of Donbass and everything. This is the only city that the Russians were able to capture, which is west of the Dnieper River. Now, Ukraine was pretty much captured in the first few days of the battle that began in Ukraine. It was probably captured somewhere around the first week of March, and this was the first major city of the Ukrainian country to fall in the hands of the Russians. I'm sure all of you remember, who've been tracking this war a little closely, that the first days were a bit foggy as to what was happening. The entire focus at that time was on Kiev. What has been happening in Kherson is that there has been a planned offensive that has been, much spoken about, that this offensive will come in August. The Ukrainian, the army was putting it out, the Ukrainian politicians were putting it out, and of course, it came out of President Zelensky's office as well. This was supposed to be initially a million-man offensive. I don't know where that million-man went, but currently it seems to be the latest figures are about 200,000 Ukrainian soldiers that are collecting in and around the areas of Kherson. This particular offensive has begun with a sort of a strike pattern which the Ukrainians have done out of the HIMARS missiles that US and other Western countries have supplied to Ukraine. HIMARS missiles are pretty accurate in terms of their targeting systems, and of course, because it is a latest generation of a weapon, I don't think at this moment Russians would have been able to do 100% guarantee sort of a thing that they would be able to intercept all those weapons. Although, if you read some of the channels that are talking about this Ukraine war online, you do have certain reports wherein Russians have successfully intercepted these missiles. Well, there is a bridge which connects the eastern part of Kherson to the western part of Kherson across the Dnieper River. It's called the Antonovsky Bridge. That is one way where there is a roadway that connects both the places. There's also another place where there is a railway track across a small dam, sort of a reservoir which has been created. Now, this particular Antonovsky Bridge has come under relentless attack, as a matter of fact, by Ukrainian HIMARS systems, or the American supplied Ukrainian HIMARS systems, which has resulted in a certain amount of damage to this particular bridge. The entire game of this bridge is that if the Ukrainians are successful in damaging this particular bridge, then they would interrupt the supply lines of the Russians when from the eastern part to the western part, in case and when the Ukrainians do manage to launch this big offensive. Interestingly, one of the things that the Russians have been doing, and I think those of us who are actually studying Russian military tactics would realize that the Russians depend a huge amount in terms of the railways, and the current damage to that railway bridge, which is going across that river, is not substantial. One of the things which has been spoken about is this HIMARS system, where it has been talked about as a game-changing weapon. And as I told you initially, the Russians were kind of shy in terms of their capability of intercepting these missiles. Today, this case is slowly becoming a bit better, because we do hear of Russian accounts where they are talking about intercepting HIMARS missiles before they are hitting these important transit lines on the river Dnieper, going across from the east to the west. The HIMARS, as a matter of fact, has been talked about, as I said, and one of the Ukrainian officials were quoted to say that they've asked for a total of about 50 HIMARS from the US for their effort in terms of countering the Russians. They've got about 16, if I'm not wrong, and of which, if you were going to go believe the Russian accounts, they have destroyed / captured 7 of them. There was a news that was floating around a couple of days ago, wherein there was a allegation wherein some of the Ukrainian rogue elements within the army have sold a HIMARS system to the Russians. I can't confirm it, and I don't think anybody would be able to do at this particular point of time. One Ukrainian official was actually said, as quoted to have said, that we know all the coordinates or all the locations and command and control stations of the Russian army. What is limiting us is the ability to truly change the situation with regards to the rate of fire that we can actually project towards the Russians. One of the most important thing that we see is that the Ukrainians are today saying that we only have 30% of the ammunition and the systems that we actually would require to start up this offensive. When you see stuff like this happening, the opinion that the NATO countries or the Western countries are just giving enough material and supplies to the Ukrainians just to keep this, front line stabilized and not a complete collapse as per se, seems very, very likely at this moment. Let's talk about this particular offensive. Now, they have been attacking this particular bridge. There's a collection of forces across the whatever front line of Kherson. And if you also see the Russian aspect of it, they are talking about relentless artillery fire from their side, targeting the Ukrainian forces that have accumulated in that area. The geography is very interesting because this is not an urban area as per se, because this is the outskirts of the urban area. These are the open steppe lands where there is a lot of farming that happens. So basically flat land. For anybody who's familiar with a little bit of artillery, you would know that flat land and an offensive is going to be a dangerous combination. So the Ukrainians are trying. They've talked about they've actually said that they've captured about 50 different settlements in and around Ukraine. Names of them have not yet been released. There's information coming from that entire area is quite mushy. Now, one of the things that we also see is that the Ukrainians have, put in a lot of systems, a lot of manpower into this particular offensive. The reasons for this particular offensive I'll discuss in a little bit, but something interesting came out when I was reading a couple of articles which were written by Ukrainians talking about their offensive, is that the Ukrainian High Command has moved a lot of their artillery from the main battle scene, which is in Donbass, in the east, to counter their forces to basically support their forces during this offensive in Kherson. What effect it will have on the battle in Donbass is something that we will see as the days evolve. Now, some questions do arise about this big offensive. Uh, it's common knowledge that any offensive should have heavy and hard air cover to protect their forces and to, of course, soften the targets as the forces are moving forward. Does Ukraine have that kind of air cover to carry out an offensive of this sort? Most Western analysts who are writing about this big Ukrainian counteroffensive have seemed to have forgotten this. We know that the West has been supplying Ukraine with certain hidden aircraft, if I may use that particular term. Certain Soviet era aircraft have been given to Ukraine from certain countries that use those particular aircraft. I would not be able to point a finger at them because I don't have substantial reports. Russian artillery superiority, and as I said, the geography of that place is basically open steppe land. The Russians have been using their artillery pretty effectively, and as a matter of fact, I'm working on a series of firepower in terms of the lessons that the Indian army can learn from the display of firepower that the Russians are doing in Ukraine with Lieutenant General Ravi Shankar, who's a former Director General of the artillery. So that'll be an interesting learning curve for me, and of course for all of us who are going to watch that particular show, as to what kind of a role firepower can play in a battle. Now, the Russian superiority in terms of firepower, as I said, is well known, and they are also based in heavy numbers in Kherson. What must happen if the Russians actually open? Have they open out or not? I cannot confirm. But what would happen if these troops are caught on the open field with the Russian artillery targeting them, bang, with a crosshair stuck onto them? As I also said, it was a million-man army at the beginning. It was supposed to be a counteroffensive that would change the lines of the war. And that's what was being sold to all of us by the Ukrainians and a lot of the media in the West. Nothing as per big or as a sort of a game-changing event that has taken place within that particular region. And if there is, I'll be sure to discuss it with all of you guys. Right, I have a couple of comments. I think Mandar, thank you so much. Namaskar. You've asked a question which I will kind of take a little later. Sunny, thank you so much, and joined up. And I think you've also recommended that I visit other YouTube channels for collaborations. Well, I will have a couple of surprises coming your way in the next couple of days. I would not like to share I'll not like to take the cat out of the bag as of now. Well, all right, let's move forward. Now, I spoke to you about the Donbass. The main battle, in my eyes, is happening in the east. It's happening in Donbass, where there is a particular defense line that the Ukrainians have formed post the fall of the twin cities, twin towns, Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, there is now a battle line which has been drawn between three town cities, as what you would like to call them. In the south, it is a city called the Bakhmut. In a little bit northeast to that, there's a city or a town or a sub town of Bakhmut, which is known as Soledar. And then the big township called Sevesk, which is a bit further northeast of that particular region. So there's a defense line that the Ukrainians have formed, and the Russians, as per their battle tactics, as we've seen in the rest of the Battle of Donbass, have been inching forward in terms of their gaining their objectives. They don't storm into a city, they basically turn it into rubble, destroy all the Ukrainian defense lines and defenses in that particular region, and then only move forward. I guess that is being done to ensure that they have lesser casualties, because in the beginning part of the operation, we know that the Russians suffered quite a large number of casualties in terms of their tactics that they had undertaken during the so-called Battle of Kiev. Now, as I said, the main battle is in Donbass. The entire focus is now shifting to Kherson. As I said, there were certain questions that I asked you. The big one that I want to ask is, why this offensive? Ukraine, as all of us might know by now, is fighting with all its force against Russia. And the Russians have used just about 200 or 250,000 of their soldiers, along with, which are also substantiated by the two militias of the two independent Russian recognized independent republics of Luhansk and Donetsk. We also have certain segments of the Chechen army fighting within the Russians, and for Wagner Group, which is rumored to be fighting in that area. The Ukrainians, of course, have suffered huge losses. Numbers I'm not going to talk about because it's the fog of war at the moment. With their entire effort right now in the defense of their nation, why would they conduct an offensive when they don't have air power, sufficient ammunition and equipment, as I mentioned to you, and probably even trained manpower? The UK had said that they would be training 10,000 soldiers every 3 months, but that training started just about a month and a half ago. What is the purpose? When I look at certain news items that are coming out of that particular region, I can piece together certain things to make a little sense. The Russians have actually asked for a referendum in Kherson. In my opinion, this whole battle that the Ukrainians are talking about is sort of a scare tactic to get the people in Kherson and tell them, listen, we are coming, so don't vote for the Russians. It can be a sort of a psychological operation driven by an entire media game to ensure that the Russian effort of a referendum does not go the way the Russians would like to. There's also a couple of news that are coming out that the Ukrainians have been sending in squads to conduct assassinations behind the lines in Kherson. As a matter of fact, a Moscow installed deputy town chief was killed recently while he was coming out of his house. So there is some patterns to the madness. It's not just complete, movement into a pointless battle. There seems to be some sort of a pattern which is emerging. There is also another thing, the Western powers would like this battle to go on because, as per their declared tactics, they would like to bleed Russia as much as possible. Why? I can't tell you, because as much as it may be bleeding the Russians, this is also having very adverse effects on Western societies. We've had 3 Western governments fall already, no matter how many would say about scandals and this and that. But if you actually get into the events, the primary focus or the primary issue because for which these governments had lost their power was Ukraine. Also, my another big question about this whole counter-offensive is that if the Ukrainians are actually able to get somewhere, let's say they come close to Kherson city or come take certain parts of Kherson city, what is the thought process? That the Russians would not have a counter-attack? The Russians would not try to retake these positions? It's something that I fail to understand. And of course, there is news available in the open domain that the Russians have created a large number of battle groups within Kherson to ensure that no such attempt of the Ukrainians is successful. We also know the Russians are strong in terms of air power from their bases in captured Ukraine and as well as Crimea. So, how is this entire battle going to go forward? Is something which is going to be interesting. In my opinion, it is pretty much the last straw where the Ukrainians are going to try and get some sort of an advantage to spin a media victory and get the attention back to Ukraine, especially with the Taiwan crisis happening in the East. I think the news headlines of Ukraine are going back. Now, there was a uh, sort of a interesting news that came out some time back is Kiev, who had ordered a mandatory evacuation of Donetsk, which is bang in the middle of the last straws of the Battle of Donbass. Evacuation, all right, one can understand it, but why a mandatory evacuation? Is it that the Kiev wants to give a blank land to the Russians when they come in and occupy those spaces? What are they trying to do is something which is beyond me. When I'm also going to talk about that, I'll also share with you a news that I picked up from a couple of Russian channels when I'm looking at them. And this has also been confirmed by some of the Western sources, where they talk about a huge grouping of armor that is collecting a little north of Donbass, which is in a place called Izium, and also somewhere around across the border in Kharkiv. What is the purpose of the collection of this entire large armored formations is something I wouldn't be able to tell you at the moment. But as I've been reading, and some experts say that this is going to be the decisive blow that the Russians have been talking about in terms of their offensive to, a point that they don't mention, but a lot of analysts believe it's the river Dnieper, which basically will cut Ukraine into half. Now, I have an interesting article, a report that was put out by CBS, which is a hardcore Western channel, which said that, the military aid which is being given to Ukraine, only 30% of it actually reaches the front line. It says that the United States has committed over 23 billion in terms of military aid to Ukraine since the start of the war, and which is basically somewhere around February. And according to the Kiel Institute of World Economy, which has been tracking global commitments, UK donated about 3.7 billion, Germany about 1.4 billion, Poland about 1.8 billion. Poland has done a lot more, but when we hear the figure 30%, where is the rest? I think it'll require a whole set of investigative journalists to get inside this entire thing to understand where this money, if it's actually been spent, has actually gone. There's also interesting news that the South China Morning Post reported some time back, interestingly, is that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is looking for big talks with the Chinese leadership or the Chinese, leader, Xi Jinping. It is interesting that the Ukrainian president is looking at taking some help from the Chinese, who's supposed to be a rock hard ally of the Russians. The Ukrainian leader is trying to urge Beijing to use its political power to press Moscow into complying with international pressure with regards to the battle in Ukraine. An interesting report that also came out some time back, and this was reported by the New York Times, where it mentioned there are certain White House administrations officials within the US who are leaking out certain information to a journalist called Tom Friedman from the New York Times, and which says that, uh, Zelensky, in terms of his administration, is going through certain troubles in terms of its coordination with the United States leadership and the White House authorities. There seems to be some sort of a tug and pull which has been taking place. It's not getting reported much in the media, but does this mean that Zelensky is now being going to be termed sometime as the guy who did not do what the US asks for. Remember, there's a pattern to this. CBS talks about 30% not, more than 30% not reaching there. Some time back, there was clamors within the US Congress about creating some sort of a Senate committee to focus and to control the kind of weapons which are going inside, to have some sort of an audit. So that means there is some sort of a realization taking place within the administration of the US that there is something wrong. Happy realization. I think a lot of us realized it long time ago that there is, this entire thing is wrong. Right. There was also an attack conducted by whom no one knows on a prisoner of war camp. Excuse me, inside occupied Ukraine, or captured Ukraine, as you would like to call it. This was full of the Azov guys, and they were basically being held as prisoners of war by the Russians. The Ukrainians are blaming the Russians, and the Russians are blaming the Ukrainians. Funnily speaking, when you look at this logically, why would the Russians do something like that? These guys were already captured. If they needed to do something, why would they blow them up? They could have just taken them to Siberia and just let them rot. That's part of history in terms of the way that the Russians have been handling a lot of things. But actually, an attack of this kind, just before rumors of a tribunal being set up, especially for these guys, is kind of interesting. There's also a report that talks about President Zelensky having quarrels with the mayors of Ukrainian cities. A Washington Post, a very Western newspaper, again coming back to my fall guy theory, is talking about that there was a bit of a row that took place between the mayor of Dnieper, which is also a city in on the Dnieper River, wherein the accusation towards the central government in Ukraine is that it's trying to centralize all authority and not let the regional governors have any say whatsoever with regards to aid money, to administration purposes, and a whole lot of other things which is coming up. It's interesting that this was reported in the Washington Post, and that's why I thought I'll kind of put it out here. Coming to the end of this particular interview, this particular talk, is also a report that came out, which is making big news right now, is that the Amnesty International, and I think I mentioned in India, a lot of us would have smiles on their face that why is Aadi talking about Amnesty International, because a lot of us don't, actually most of us would not believe a word that comes out of their mouth. But let's look at this particular report. It talks about Ukraine using civilian schools, hospitals, and other civilian infrastructure as venues to host their soldiers, to keep their soldiers, to launch attacks from, and so on and so forth. Amnesty International states that this is something that they found with their reportage, with their investigation that they conducted within Ukraine, and they put out this particular report. Now, it is also interesting that Amnesty is a very pro-Western sort of a thing in India, especially. All of us know the entire mess that Amnesty has caused. But, there was a lot of condemnation that came out of Ukraine, and Amnesty International to that condemnation stated that it does not intend to change its conclusions about Ukraine and violation of war laws. This, of course, came in, as I said, after a lot of condemnation that came in, especially from President Zelensky's office itself. There are interesting things wherein certain Western media outlets who are now trying to criticize, like the Times, as a matter of fact, called Amnesty a Russian propagandist. The world is becoming a crazy place. I don't think it'll be easy for us to understand what's happening. And of course, there's the head of Amnesty International in Ukraine has also resigned. I mean, that's something which I think all of us would realize that is going to happen. Right. One of the things which is also making news on the sideline, not really directly connected to the war, is that President Putin and President Erdogan are having a meeting in Sochi as we speak. Now, one is from NATO, one is, of course, President Putin, the guy who's eating up Ukraine, I have to say. But it's interesting to see that both these gentlemen are actually having a meeting and talking about various issues which range from Syria, I guess, from a lot of the grain which is going out of Ukraine right now, where Turkey is supposed to be trying to figure out a way to get this entire thing going out. And of course, the battle in Ukraine. There's some sort of a link which is being created between President Erdogan and President Putin. I'm sure the Western powers would be twitching their thumbs to figure out what exactly these two gentlemen are talking. Looking at Erdogan's actions, in the past some time, his actions have been unpredictable. He sided with the Russians in the beginning, then he sided to get Sweden and Finland into NATO as well. So, and now he flips back and jumps back into the Russian fold, or the Russian side, if I may say that, when he went for a meeting, a trilateral meeting in Iran, and now he's meeting the president of Russia in Sochi, in Russia itself. The halat, if I may use that word, in Europe is bad. The gas is becoming more and more expensive. Nord Stream 1 seems to be a bit of a challenge. I think the West is going to soon realize that their blind support towards this battle and not hedging for a negotiated settlement is going to cost them dearly. It's not that it's only affecting the West. I'm sure in India, all of us have also realized that India went through a whole set of challenges when this war came into being, and having that, it's got its own challenges within its own neighborhood. I don't think India would want to have this war dragging on long as it has already. But as a matter of fact, at the end, I would like to say, if you would listen to Sergei Lavrov, who some time back had mentioned, because of the Western interference in this particular battle, the geographic objectives of the Russian army can and will change. And lastly, how will the entire fracas that has taken place in the China-Taiwan sector going to affect the geopolitics concerning Russia and Ukraine? A lot of us create a dynamic, or create a sort of a commonality between both these regions. Of course, there is very little to combine both of them. Very little common ground find in both these guys. But anyways, right, I'm going to look at some questions or some comments that have come out here just to see. I think Mandar, you were here. I said hello, and he says the main question is, what will Ukraine achieve with this objective? I think I discussed that. To me, it's a pointless exercise. It's going to, if I may use the word, ensure Ukraine loses a large chunk of their force, because the Russians are strong in terms of their artillery. They might not be doing these armored offensives that Western powers and the Western analysts wanted to see. A lot of us in India, I guess, wanted to see the same thing as well. But their tactics have been different. They have played the game differently. They've set up their objectives differently. They are using their equipment and using their offensive weapons and their manpower in a very, very different way. So it's very difficult to actually analyze what's going to happen in this entire thing. But as far as what Ukraine can achieve, it's absolutely nothing. If I may have a word in it, and if I may be any authority who's talking about this right now. Sunny says that Zelensky destroyed Ukraine by going into a war which he couldn't afford or fight. West poured money, which was quickly stolen by unscrupulous Ukrainians. Ukrainian women and children are at the mercy of wolves. I think some strong words. I won't be able to kind of comment on the women and children part of it, but as a human being, one can actually understand what that country is going through. At no point of time I am against Ukraine. I actually think what is happening to Ukraine is sad. This whole rhetoric of keeping the war going is wrong. It needs to stop, and a negotiated settlement of whatever sort needs to be brought along. One of the things to also mention is that the longer this war goes on, the more difficult will it be for the Ukrainians to come to any sort of a common ground with the Russians. It's not going to be easy. Moving on, Mandar says, Aadi, you must visit other YouTube channels for collaborations, etc., and that will increase your subscriber count. That brings me, guys, those of you who are not subscribed, please do hit that subscribe button. Like this video. It is very critical, because when you like it, YouTube kind of helps me in bringing a newer audience from different places. A lot of us in India have kind of found that we've lost certain interest within the Ukraine war, but I think it's important for us to see what's happening there as geopolitical enthusiasts, military enthusiasts. Mr. Venki, nice to see you here, sir. Having vetted that Ukraine as their proxy, I feel NATO has caught itself in a catch-22 situation. I'd say it's a catch-44, sir. But anyways, after realizing that aid is getting fragmented and being channelized to militia instead of regular military, a lot many people in the US actually, if you listen to Scott Ritter, you listen to Colonel Douglas McGregor, they talk about this very openly, and they don't have any sort of a I don't see any particular agenda that they are carrying. But at the end of it, if even if this sort of a thing is happening, it's on the expense of Ukrainians. As I was saying, it's on a daily basis. I'm sure that the Ukrainians are not putting these figures out, but on a daily basis, there is a certain loss that the Ukrainian country is facing, and the Russians are ensuring that infrastructure, industry, and all that is what was left of Ukraine till now will not be there for it going forward. Right, let's go forward. We also have make small clips of your videos. Yeah, sure, I'll do that. This is sort of a effort in terms of promoting my YouTube channel. That's Thank you so much firstly for that. Start a separate channel only for short clips. Please put some more effort. Need this content, more effort in, and people need this content and get educated. Well, thank you so much. I try my best. Mr. Venki says actually there's a UN report confirming Ukrainians' use of human shields. Yes, absolutely, sir. This is it's a sad situation. It's a part of war. I'm not trying to condone this at any point of time. This is being seen in modern warfare today, back to back. We saw what happened with the ISIS in the Middle East. We saw what happened in multiple other places, and we are now seeing what's happening in Ukraine as well. I don't know this channel is available on Instagram. Please put more, content on Instagram. The youth is hungry. Thank you so much, and appreciate your efforts in bringing elite panelists. I try my best, sir. It is, as a individual who is not from a military background, who's not from a geopolitical background, it's a little difficult for me to keep up with these guys. But I'm grateful to all of them who come to my channel. Coming back to aid, after the initial flooding of Ukraine, NATO hardware and ordnance, EU is now more concerned with increasing incidents of NATO arms making it into the wrong hands. Sir, yes, sir, there is no question. There has been a lot of reports that Ukrainian weapons are available on the dark web. As I said, there's also a report that some Ukrainian segment of some army has sold one of the HIMARS to the Russians. I'm sure the Russians are even studying last nut and bolt within that thing. But it's a sad state of affairs where the West is basically throwing money into this entire thing at the expense of its own taxpayers. And one can actually see what's happening in these Western countries when you see the inflation the way it is. There are certain places like I think Germany where uh, the monthly electricity bill is going to go 2 times, if I'm not wrong, by now and basically going into the winter. How is this going to go forward is something which is besides me. What is the future point of air defense weapons? Well, air defense is a huge subject. As a matter of fact, I'm actually working on a topic like this with Aadi, with someone. I will come to you with the whole actually episode talking about this. India has moved forward. I've done a talk about this with Air Marshal Khosla. Do have a check. It was about the S-400 and the capabilities of air defense, basically understanding this entire concept as per se, because it is not just one system that works. It's a multiple layered system that creates an air defense structure, and the communication pattern that actually goes along with it. And with the advent of drones, with the advent of missilery, there's a whole new segment of air defense which is going to come into place. Examples of which we can see in Ukraine in front of us. So much so that LT and PL are seriously introspecting on operating depost warehouse. Yeah, absolutely, sir. There is a lot, of things which are happening. As a matter of fact, weapons and the kind of stuff which we've seen going into this battle and the way it has been done, it's amazing. I mean, $23 billion, if you look at it, plus the other countries, about $30 odd billion of weapons going into a country the size of Ukraine in just a matter of 6 months is amazing. Uh, but as a matter of fact, how far things are going to go, something that we'll have to see. We see a lot of information of Russian air defense missiles, but nothing on, yeah, guns. Absolutely, the point of defense is a great point. Defense is great against small drones. We are upgrading our L-70 and ZU guns against the Chinese. Well, interestingly, I think, Harsh, one of the things that we're going to notice with the Chinese is that because of the entire display of firepower the Chinese have done, it's also going to be a very interesting thing to see that the West has, and of course, I think a lot of us would be actually looking at the kind of frequencies that they're firing on, the kind of system that they're using. And there was a report that I was reading that came out. I think it was in CNBC or one of these Western media outlets where they spoke about US very closely monitoring the entire Chinese activities within that region. Let me also say that I also read a report where in the South China Morning Post, which talks about the Taiwanese ship and the Chinese ships playing cat and mouse games within the South China Sea. So one can actually also look at it the other way around. And General Shankar actually brought this out very clearly in one of our talks, I think yesterday, is that the Chinese may be doing what they're doing, but they're also exposing their systems and their procedures to the rest of the world, which eliminates the big element of surprise that a lot of armies work on. Can India get programmers that fled Ukraine? Their programming was, I'm told, high end. Well, India should look at that. As a matter of fact, I think we spoke about the segment I had done with Commodore Anil Jai Singh, where we spoke about submarines and a lot of the engines and a lot of the parts that come from Ukraine. I think it was important that India should have picked up a lot of that thing and brought it here. We need to find these opportunities for Indian defense, and I think it's very, very critical that we need to act on them and entire see how it can actually develop Indian defense sector. Because at the end of it, Atmanirbharta is great, but we need to have and meet the requirements of today, tomorrow, and coming in the future. It is important that we see what's available in the world and how we can figure this out. I'm going to leave a small clue to those of you who are aviation enthusiasts, and I'm sorry for this. There seems to be a bit of a network trouble. I think Mandar, you've also hinted towards it. I'll fix that for my next, live. I'd leave a small sort of a note for you guys. Is India and Brazil had a bit of a sort of a game sometime in the early 80s, 90s, where one of the Brazilian companies, and I'm not going to mention which one, is for you to find out, actually came to the HAL and said that we would like to collaborate. And that particular company today is one of the biggest aircraft manufacturers as we speak. But at that time, HAL did not look at them the way they should have. Mandar mentions we need to discuss Tu-60 strategic bombers. We are close to raising 6 at first. Absolutely, yes. There is some very interesting news, and I've sent it to someone that I want to discuss this particular thing. Strategic bombers is something that India has been wanting for a long time. I know a lot of the ex-bomber pilots would be very happy to hear that. Hashtag ask Aadi. Thanks, Sunny. That's probably the first time I'm going to hear this. You said that in the previous question as well. A Chinese couple was caught kidnapping a baby about a month or two ago. I saw a social media post by a Ukrainian girl looking for accommodation in UK. Got thousands of wolves replying, no government help. You brought up a very touchy topic. The humanitarian kind of aspect of this entire any war is horrible. I mean, the kind of stuff that happens and might be happening on the ground is something one can't even describe. You imagine you've been staying, and those are guys who've been staying in those places for, I don't know, 50 years, and suddenly the house is gone. So it's not something that uh, it's ridiculous and horrible what is happening around the place, and we see all lip service and no movement as per se. Love your mustache. Thank you so much, Akshay. All right. If anything, we should target Ukrainian scientists on engine technology for drones. Yeah, a lot more. Why just that? They've got the Antonov factory. I'm sure there's a lot of it is destroyed right now. India needs strategic lift aircraft. Why not talk to them? There's a lot we can do. Sunny, okay. Right, I think that's the end of the show. I'd like to thank you. I know I'm very new at this particular thing. It's going to take me a little time to sort this out. Thanks for the people that have joined me, for all the comments, all the suggestions, all the support. I must say it's heartening for somebody like me to get this kind of support from the panelists and from the audience. I'm sure to kind of grow forward and become the strategic analyst and the strategic enthusiast that I'm wanting to be. I'm going to stop here. Yes, Mr. Venki, you're right. It's either Embraer is close to what you're talking about. It's an interesting story. I recommend all of you read it up. They actually came to us wanting to take our help in terms of avionics and stuff like that. We shunned them away, and look where they are today. It's something that we've missed out in our history. Right, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Once again, do hit the subscribe button, hit the like. It really helps me out. And of course, don't forget, if you can and need to help me out, click the thanks button to donate to Dev Talks, become a member of Dev Talks, and help me grow this geopolitical game, which is called Dev Talks. Till next time, Jai Hind.